Pop quiz. What do you get when you let the founder of the We Need Diverse Books movement update a children's classic? Answer: a significantly less diverse version of said children's classic. Duh. I mean, that's what you were going for, right? Welcome back to the Read Like a Man podcast, you guys. So this story starts a couple of weeks ago when my wife Kim and my oldest son William come up into my studio and tell me that they are super frustrated because they have been reading The Cricket in Times Square, and the study guide that they have for it from Memoria Press, who's our homeschool publisher, is asking a bunch of questions about stuff that didn't happen in the chapter. They're asking these questions, and Kim and William are just sitting here like, that literally didn't happen. That conversation never happened. How are we supposed to know the answer to this? So, turns out that the reason that they do this is because there are two different versions of this book. So, Memoria actually has two different study guides for the original version and for the updated version. So, how different really are these versions? I'm sure you're curious. We were curious. So we went to the library and we got the original version. And then, because we are psychotic bookworms, we decided to sit down at the dinner table and read one chapter from each version so that we could compare the two, because we're normal. It's fine. Everything's fine. To say that there are differences between the two versions of this book is somewhat akin to saying that Harry Potter was a pretty successful series. The differences are actually crazy, okay? So, for example, in chapter 5 of the book, we meet Mickey. He's a young, redheaded dude who is the counterman at the store, and some of his lines in the original book include these following conversation. In the old version, he says, "That's a fine cricket. Why don't you let him stand on the rim? How would the cricket like a glass of soda? This is his own cup. You can come over and get fresh water anytime." Okay, that's the old version. In the new version, Mickey's lines are exactly the same. Like word for word, nothing has changed. Okay, so meanwhile, a couple chapters later, we meet Mr. Fong, who is an elderly Chinese man who owns a shop with a sign on it that either reads Sci Fong Chinese Novelties or Mr. Fong's Fine Instruments. Okay, this just depends on how, diverse you want your shop sign to be. So, anyways, Mario has conversations with Mr. Fong throughout the book. So, in the new version of the book, the lines from that conversation go like this. "Pleased to meet you, Mario. Come in. This is a very special cricket cage. It was the home of a just and brave fighter who brought much luck to its owner. Because your cricket is so remarkable, I will sell the cage for 15 cents. Okay, call me crazy, but does he sound like basically exactly the same as the dude we met 2 chapters before whose name is Mickey? And if he does, should he sound exactly the same? Because, okay, so let's think about this. Like, we have one young, white, redheaded dude versus older Chinese shop owner. I would think that their voices would sound somewhat different. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. It just seems like they would sound pretty different. Like, they don't sound very diverse or like there's much variety between their two voices, right? Keeping in mind here that variety is literally the definition of diversity, right? So in the new diverse version of the book, there is, about this much variety in the character voices between these two very different individuals. So we're like, okay, well, if the new one is that lacking in variety, then most likely the old one is probably horrendously lacking in variety. So let's check out the lines from the old book. Well, in the old book, Sci Fong, not Mr. Fong, he's Sci Fong in the old book, those same lines from him go something like this. "Come in shop, please. This very ancient cricket cage. Once cricket who belonged to Emperor of all China lived in this cage. You know story of first cricket?" Then he proceeds to tell a 2-page Chinese folktale, which has been completely removed from the new version. And then he finishes by saying, "Because this cricket's so remarkable, I sell cage for 15 cents. Okay, don't get me wrong. Is it possible that if a child read the old version of this book there's a possibility that they could develop a stereotype of elderly Chinese men in thinking that they all speak broken English, right? I will give you that. That is entirely possible. That's like that is something that actually could happen, all right? But if we move aside from the realm of possibility of like what could happen, and we look at what's actually occurred in the updates of this book, would anyone who has more than 2 brain cells to rub together say that this new version is more diverse than the old version? Bearing in mind, again, that the definition of diversity is variety. So if there's a version of the book where any 2 characters who are very different, like young Caucasian dude versus old first-generation Chinese shop owner in America, if these 2 can be substituted for each other and could speak each other's lines without confusing the reader, is this really the more diverse version of the book? Like, I don't. And the most important thing to keep in mind here is that Mickey's character didn't change at all. Okay? So the young Caucasian dude, his character did not get updated, did not get changed. His lines are exactly the same. The only updates that we made in the new version of the book is to take the Chinese man and make him not stick out like a sore thumb. Because in the old version of the book, he does. Okay? But in the new version, he's just like, he speaks like the normal white dude. He acts like a normal young white dude. And honestly, like, I'm left to assume that he also looks like the normal young white dude. Because if we look at the illustrations in the book, we have an illustration here of Mickey behind the counter, and that illustration is exactly the same in the old version and in the new version. It looks exactly the same, right? But then when we get to our chapter on Mr. Sai Fong over here, well, in our old version of the book, I have an illustration that gives me some idea of what Sai Fong might look like. Okay? Now, remember, Mickey looks exactly the same in both of them, right? But we wanted to make it more diverse and more accurate. We want to have accurate characters for the people in the book to meet. So in the new version of the book, we updated the illustration and just removed Sai Fong completely. Like, he's just gone. We didn't make him like any more realistic looking of a Chinese man or like more normal looking of a Chinese man, or like no, he's just gone. Like, we just got rid of him. He's just like, we didn't need that. So in this updated version of the book, the old Chinese man acts exactly like the young white dude. He speaks exactly like the young white dude, and I'm left to assume that he must look the same as the young white dude because I don't have anything in the illustrations to tell me otherwise, right? So when you look at this and you understand that in order to stave off a potentially bad stereotype being built in a child's mind of, all Chinese shop owners are old, fat men who speak broken English, right? In order to stave off the possibility of that, what we've done is replace a unique character that we're forcing a reader to develop their own opinion of, right? And we just replaced him with this bland, androgynous, prepackaged plot device that is just replaceable with any other thing in the book, all in an effort to ensure that we know exactly what to think about him, which is that we are not any better than him because he speaks the same way that we do and he acts the same way that we do, and we just need a guarantee that we don't develop any bad stereotypes and thinking that we're better than him, right? So, like, are you guys getting what I'm saying here? The thing is that in order to protect the reader from possibly developing a view that they're somehow above or like better than this old Chinese character, the thought police have like practically guaranteed that the reader develops a view that there's nothing special about this old Chinaman or anyone else in the book for that matter, because they're all exactly the same. So, in an effort to avoid a potential harmful stereotype being developed, we basically guaranteed the formation of a different one that is equally as harmful. Because we didn't want people to think that they're special, now we're just going to try to force people to develop the stereotype that no one is special and no one is different and no differences matter at all. And although on the surface that seems like a tolerant and loving attitude to carry out, it doesn't actually work in real life, because in real life people are different. And we do have to deal with those differences, and we do have to make decisions and judgments on them accordingly and according with the value of the human life that God has given to every single person, but also in accordance with how that person acts. And we treat people differently based on what they're doing. And so this whole stereotype of like, oh, we're just going to build characters and try to convince people that the world is just filled with people exactly the same as you, and there's no differences that you have to worry about. You can just treat everyone exactly the same. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work in real life, right? So I want to contrast this with this book, The Sign of the Beaver. This is another book that Will and Kim are supposed to be reading this year. And I picked it up because I didn't realize that Elizabeth George Spear also is the author of The Bronze Bow. And The Bronze Bow was one of my favorite books growing up as a kid. I don't remember that I ever read this one, but I did love that one. So anyways, I grabbed this, and wouldn't you know it, I open it up, and the very first thing that I come to is an introduction talking about all of the flaws and failings in this book, right? And the guy that wrote this, his name is Joseph, and he goes through and he talks about a bunch of inaccurate stuff in this book, right? You know, he's like, there's a part where like the Indian shoots the bear, you know, in the skull with a bow, but the bow that he had like wouldn't have been able to do that. That's not at all how you would kill a bear. That's not realistic. You know, the Atayan uses the word squaw in this certain way that was actually very derogatory, and they would not have used it like that, and that's not accurate. And he lists all these couple of things that are not accurate and not correct in the book, right? So I'm sitting here going like, great, here it comes. Like, this is going to be another cricket in Times Square round 2, like here we go, right? This version is the same story we all know and love, with a few small but mighty changes, right? And I'm like, cool, great. What small but mighty changes did you put into this one? And I start to read it, and I realize, oh my gosh, this book is this whole introduction followed by the complete original text of the book. No updates, no changes, no de-diversification. So in reality, both of these books and the people who updated them tried to do the same thing. And on the surface, they did do the same thing. They addressed the incorrect issues and worldviews and stuff that are inside of these books, but they did it with two very distinct hearts and two very distinct approaches that lead to two very distinct outcomes. So in The Sign of the Beaver, we go through this introduction where Joseph is listing all the problems with all this, right? And then when we get to the end of it, how he summarizes is, he says, however, if one brings to the book a deeper understanding of the period and the native culture that Spear attempted to depict, The Sign of the Beaver has much to recommend it to 21st century readers. The author clearly hoped that we might all learn from each other, as did Matt and Atayan. At its best, this book is a useful lesson meant to teach the importance of seeing other humans, no matter how different, as beings worthy of respect. And then, again, treats you to the original version of the story. No changes, no edits. Contrast that with the intro to A Cricket in Times Square, where in here Stacy says that today's young readers are socially minded, independent thinkers, and we are counting on them to shape a more equitable future for all. So we've made a bunch of changes, right? So instead of trusting the readers to be socially minded, independent young thinkers, she proceeds to cut out every inaccurate part of this story, which, just doing some quick like page comparison and page counts of the chapters and stuff, is between 10 and 30% of the original story. So reading A Cricket in Times Square just pisses me off, because I read this introduction that is actually underlying very like rude and offensive to me, and then I go into a book that's missing 10 to 30% of the original text about it. So the way that they went about updating this book is very derogatory and very offensive to me. And it just made me mad, and it made me not want to listen and to not have any empathy for the things that they were trying to correct and the viewpoints that are in this book that they're trying to help you realize are incorrect, right? Versus reading The Sign of the Beaver, whenever I hit one of the parts in this book that he talked about that was inaccurate, I read it more carefully, and I read it slower, and I read it trying to gain a deeper understanding, and I read it thinking about like, man, I wonder why, like, I wonder if she knew that the word squaw isn't like how they would have used that, or like most likely, benefit of the doubt, like she probably didn't. And, it's just like one of those like, slang words that people trying to learn English have a hard time with, because, we use the word in a totally wrong way. I'm like, oh, dude, like that move was so sick, and somebody's like, wait, what? Like you're not feeling well? And I'm like, no, it was cool, man. Like it was sick. It was cool, So it made me enter into the book with such more intention, because the way that they did it assumed that I am mature enough to engage with this for my own self and forming my own opinion. If I'm given the facts of the matter, I can get to the own opinion through my own thinking and my own mental work and processes, right? But again, when you compare that to A Cricket in Times Square, the way that they went about updating this book basically tells me as the reader, granted, like right now, whatever, I'm a 32-year-old man reading this, but even as a kid reading it, what they're telling me is that, hey, we don't trust you to come to the right conclusion on your own. So instead of actually acting upon what they say, which is that we know you'll be an independent and socially minded young person, they just don't trust me enough to actually let me do that. So they're going to cut out everything that forces me to do that, and they're going to feed me on a silver platter exactly what they want me to think and what they want me, the conclusions that they want me to come to from reading this book, right? So they do it in a way that's like, oh, don't worry, we've done all the thinking for you and we've done all the wrestling for you. You don't need to work through these issues and figure them out and work them all out in your own head. Like you can just accept what we've done for you and you can become a lifeless automaton, just like our new characters in the updated version of this book. And that's the real problem with censoring books. It's fundamentally a self-defeating proposition, right? Because with the best of intentions, people that do it in an effort to try to build robust and correct thinking minds, especially in the next generation. But the fact of the matter is that if a mind never has to do any thinking for itself, it automatically becomes weak. The only way to build a truly robust mind for ourselves and in the next generation of people is to engage your thoughts with the difficulties of life and come to a conclusion through your own mental and spiritual and emotional effort. Like that's the only way that it happens. You cannot be fed an opinion and ingest that as your opinion and have that result in a robust mind. You didn't do any work for it, so your mind wasn't strengthened. So anytime that you have something like this, you are by default building a weak mind. So censoring books is always going to be a self-defeating proposition. It's always going to be a self-defeating action. And that's the thing that we have to remember. And that if you take anything away from this episode today, what I want you to remember is that the uncomfortable truth of the matter is when our thinking is done for us, everyone involved suffers in the end. They may not suffer right away, but in the end, when our thinking is done for us, everyone involved in that whole proposition suffers, because you cannot build a robust mind if someone else does your thinking for you. If someone else does your thinking for you, you're always going to result in a weak mind, and weak minds always lead to suffering, no matter what, no exceptions, period.